Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Saving the World podcast with Luke Macmichael and Martin Rezny. Today, we have a very special guest, Martin Rezny. We're going to change our format. Whenever we don't have another guest, one of us will be the guest, and we'll have some fun interviewing each other again as we talk about many different fun concepts. Today, the concept is hypergaming and understanding how games work and what the game of life is all about and how you win and all these fun concepts. And our special guest, Martin Rezny, is going to teach us about these things a little bit, and we'll get to ask him some questions. So welcome, Martin.
Yay!
Great to have
Long
you with us.
time haven't been here, I think. Feels like.
Thanks for joining us today. I'm gonna give the floor to you to talk about hypergaming. What is hypergaming, and what's it all about? What can we learn
Well,
from it?
I think that's very important to be precise about the terms. If you say gaming, then it implies that it's computer games. And we will definitely probably talk about computer games as well. But specifically, what I want to talk about is the hypergame theory, which is a version of game theory. Because most people know game theory. I don't think many people know hypergame theory or what it is, even though if you know game theory, you can probably assume what hypergame theory may be about a little bit. And for me, I just discovered it actually pretty recently, so I'm by no means expert on hypergame theory. I'm just very excited about it since I found it. Because recently we are developing various documents and charters on our savingtheworldtogether.org website. And the one that I'm currently in the process of writing, and it turned out to be very long and very detailed about a lot of stuff, is the document for SGEARS, or the Society. Let me see if I can remember the name. I'm usually just using the abbreviations because the names sometimes get a bit long. I think it's the Society for Global Ethical Application of Revolutionary Sciences. So that's one of the institutions that we are devising because we believe something like this is necessary to exist to guarantee our future survival, particularly because this one is about our future survival. That's very much what it is about. And my main issue with how even strategists, or I assume intelligence people, are going about dealing with various threats or risks that are related to our future is that they usually use game theory, and that's an approach that assumes that you're playing a game that has rules that you know. It's not that complicated of a concept, actually. Like game theory, even though it involves some pretty complicated mathematics, if you want to, is not necessarily unexplainable to normal people, because game theory is something that every person is doing, and not even if they're explicitly, not just when they're explicitly playing what they know is a game. Like if you're explicitly playing a game like Monopoly, is probably the most famous game, like a board game, or it could be something more complicated like Dungeons and Dragons. Like the rules can be variously abstract or complex. That doesn't matter too much, as long as you know that it is a game that it has rules, who are the players, you know all of these things about it, and you're engaging in it. Then you have to employ some sort of game theory if you want to win. Like if you're playing not to win, but just to have fun or something, then you don't have to be concerned too much with game theory. But if you're playing to win, like for instance, if you're playing poker and you want to hopefully win some money by doing it long term, and I have several friends who actually were professional poker players, so I do know a lot about what that entails. So then basically you need to not just understand the rules of the game, but you need to understand the game theory of normal player behavior, so that you understand what your opponents are going to do, and you also can understand that what it is that you should ideally do. So like there's this concept called ideal player, meaning that somebody who's actually always doing the optimal action that is making them most likely to win. And I guess for this purpose, we should define what winning is. So in the game theory terms, what you're trying to do, like by winning, is to achieve the most optimal outcome. Like whatever it is in the given situations, usually games have specifically defined winning conditions in their rules. So you're trying to, in economic games, you're basically trying to maximize profit. That's what's usually described as the rational thing to do. And so that's how game theory is actually related to something called rational choice theory. Usually the assumption is like you're being rational here, meaning that you're actually trying to logically accomplish something. And the something that you're trying to accomplish is the best possible outcome quantifiably. Like however you quantify what's best or better for you. That like to always achieve most that you could have theoretically, mathematically achieved, which, if you go into the mathematics, usually can be outlined. So hypergame theory is all this, but forget about you knowing anything about the game that you're playing. It's basically when you are playing a game, but you don't necessarily know how many players are playing, and if they're playing against you or with you, and you don't necessarily know anything about the rules of the game. You may believe that you know the rules, but you know enough to understand that there's some uncertainty as to whether those rules are exactly what you think they are, or if they, for instance, can or may not stay the same over time. So there are just uncertainties that you introduce. So the hyper in it means that, technically speaking, the rules of the game or other information about the game, like the number of players, are also variables, meaning they're not set, they're not given, you're not certain about them. So it's like if you play a normal game like chess, and chess has limited sets of pieces, and you have one opponent, unless you're playing some weird kind of 5-dimensional chess, which also exists. So you have one opponent, you have set number of pieces, and each piece moves in a specific way, and you have turns, you take turns, so first you play, then your opponent plays, and the white pieces begin first, and the black pieces go second, all of these things. But then, so you're playing, and you're close to winning, and your opponent flips the board. Then, like, the question is, so what game was it that you were playing? Maybe you were playing a hyper game. Maybe there was more stuff being involved in there, and you thought you were playing chess, but maybe you've just lost a friend. And that was the real game that you were actually playing without you knowing about it.
That makes me think a little bit about Jerry's game. Did you ever watch the Bugs Life Jerry's game where this old man playing chess against himself?
Oh yeah, I've seen the man.
And he goes
playing
back
chess,
and forth, and at the end he has like a heart attack and pulls himself into. That's kind of an interesting concept where he wasn't actually playing chess; he was playing a Psycho game with a heart attack. But yeah, bit of an aside. So let me just see if I can summarize a little bit based on what you said. So game theory, as I see it, is very specific kind of mathematical rules. Where you can kind of plug in the formulas, plug in the logic. This person's going to do this, that person's going to do this. What is the best way for me to win? Understanding what they're going to do and understanding what their perfect strategy might be. How do I combat against that? And how do I maximize the chances of me winning that game by employing this game theory? That's kind of how I understood the game theory. Is that
one issue? Humans are subjective beings, so modeling what their behavior is supposed to be is not just strict mathematics. Like you have to run the experiment to see what subjective, nonsense, irrational thing they're doing.
Yeah, but the basis of game theory is that everyone's somewhat rational and has somewhat the same logic.
The basis of game theory is that everybody should be rational if they want to win.
Right. And they're going to employ the most rational strategies at any given point based on the situation and the knowledge they currently have. So okay, I get that. So then hypergame adds this whole other layer on top of it, which makes it almost unfathomable with so many variables that it kind of boggles the mind even just talking about the concept of hyper. Like you think a hyperloop or hyperspace or a hyper everything. Like it's just your mind wants to explode with the.
It's literally like that in that it adds extra dimension.
Right. Right. And so just trying to wrap your mind, your three-dimensional mind and your logic, numbers around this kind of concept of hypergaming is very tricky, complicated, but fun in some ways, trying to just open your mind. Like Marvel with the multiverse, I think it screws up everything because it's so complicated and it's so hard to care about any one universe when you've got a million universes to protect.
I think they might need a hypergame theorist to figure out multiverse plots that make sense.
I think so. And I think, the concept of hypergaming is really trying to broaden our minds, broaden our horizons and our ability as a human thinking individual to try to expand the way we think about games and expand the way we think about life and what are the goals? How do we win this game of life? And more importantly, how do we mutually win? How do we create win-win games? When we think of the game of life being kind of a hyper game concept.
Well, that's actually the most sort of problematic thing that I've seen about hypergame theory so far. It seems to be modeled on very competitive situations. I haven't seen a lot of cooperative hypergame theory being actually explored scientifically yet. but I maybe just have missed that, or it's obscure papers. It's possible, but haven't really found a lot of about cooperative hypergames. But it must be a thing.
Well, I think that's definitely something we'd like to focus on. With our whole saving the world together concept is trying to employ these game theory, hyper game theory concepts and expand them to a theory where we can all win. And some people don't like cooperative games. I personally love cooperative games. They're kind of fun. D&D is an example of a cooperative game, Dungeons and Dragons, where you're basically all working together to accomplish a goal. In these cooperative games, typically the winner is the one that does the coolest thing, or is the most powerful, or has the most ability to affect the team winning the game. So it's kind of like you're trying to, what do you call it? Show your muscles and flex. You're trying to flex your ability to win the game as a team.
Especially if you're a barbarian. But in this sense, you have just discovered a competitive dimension to a cooperative game in that sense.
And yeah, sorry. And I think that's the point I want to summarize, is that almost any game's not really fun unless there's kind of some competitive aspects to it. I think humanity itself, at its core, life in general is competitive, even though, some liberal people will try to say competition is bad in some ways. And I kind of agree that it can be bad. But I feel pretty strongly that life would be pretty boring and pretty pointless without competition of some kind, or without I guess motivations and winning conditions and things like this.
Well, that's why I quite like the concept of co-opetition. Like you can have a fusion of cooperation and competition, and it could be either competing at being more cooperative, meaning that it's basically competing at helping others more. So there's a competition, and you can announce like the world champion of like helping everybody else the most, and that's still a competition that people can get extremely competitive about, to the benefit therefore of all. Like the way how you set up the interaction between cooperation and competition in your system can lead to a vastly different outcomes. But what winning would mean actually.
Yeah, I like to think of it as like a talent show almost, where you might have the best talent, or the best winner, America's Got Talent, or The Voice. But the real goal of these shows is not really to win. It might be for the individual, but it's really about sharing a talent and entertaining each other, right? Where everyone in the whole world is kind of lifted up when somebody's able to share, a groundbreaking ability, or a groundbreaking song, or story of some kind. And it entertains everybody, and all the ships of the world are kind of lifted together in this win-win situation where we share beauty and we share knowledge.
Although I have to interject, I still don't approve of your use of global flooding metaphors for positive things in these trying times.
I'm sorry. I keep going back to it. I'm sorry, but I anyway. However it looks, we're all progressing together, and I think that's something that we definitely have to bear in mind when we think about games and hyper games and all the other games of the world.
I just now thought of like a parody of the saying. You could say, rising temperatures lift all boats.
Okay. Yes.
Use an environmental joke a little
bit. I understood. Okay, so that being said, how do we, I guess, use this knowledge of hypergame that you've explained to us to live better lives and to save the world? How can it help us, I guess, progress?
I think we have to separate living better lives and saving the world here a little bit. The context in which I discovered it for myself, and I used it to explain something in the SGEARS document, was that if you want to survive, then it is probably a competitive game. It's not going to be entirely cooperative, or probably that's one of those games which is most not cooperative by necessity almost. And in this case, it was in relation to our current situation, in which we are, facing a number of risks going into the future. And I think the scientific community as a whole, like the academia, which is a very important component in coming up with plans how to address problems globally, is kind of stuck in a game theory mode and not really open to exploring hypergame possibilities, even though real life is almost certainly much more of a hypergame than an actual game. Like, for instance, NASA has a, I think, planetary defense office or something to that effect. And their idea of planetary defense is, we're going to deflect asteroids. And I mean, that's great. I mean, like, we can very probably do it. I think there was the recent test where we successfully hit some sort of asteroid or meteorite with the DART spacecraft,
Dart,
and
yeah,
it actually
the dart
moved
one.
it much more than was expected. So seems kinetic impactors are a very viable way of deflecting cosmic objects. So that's all well and good. But they sort of exist in a gamified context within this, that there are only natural objects out there who only unintelligently are moving at set trajectories, and they additionally believe that like their models are basically perfect already, so they're not really planning for a lot of unexpected, like for instance, they're never going to plan for like an unexpected direction of an unexpected type of object to intersect Earth. It's a difficult thing to pronounce. Earth's trajectory, because, like for instance, like Oumuamua, like you can have now we know you can have an extrasolar, even like potentially dumb object, even though there's controversy even about that regarding Oumuamua. But let's say it's just an extrasolar comet. And so, what do we know about extrasolar comets or not? So, like currently, scientists would say, even in like just in the focus of like this one threat, they would basically say that, oh, we're not going to be hit by anything really, because we've looked everywhere pretty much where the really dangerous stuff should be, and we would probably see all the really dangerous stuff. And so they would give you some probability, like with which we're safe for what amount of time, based on their calculations and stuff, and that's all really nice. But there's basically a certainty that there are some things that they don't know about that are not factored into those calculations, and it doesn't really feel like they're factoring in or trying to factor in things that are called, in the sort of a military intelligence speak, they're called like unknown unknowns. Like you're sort of working with things that we very probably don't know about, but are very probably real. And so what it is that we can do against threats that we don't really know what they are or believe are not probable, but may be wrong about it. And that's something that I believe military intelligence agencies, or just generally intelligence people, are just way better at than academicians generally. But mostly in public discussion, you only hear the academicians, obviously. You don't hear the military intelligence people telling you how they're doing things. Like that's not really a thing that they do very often. So I believe that the only group of people that's playing a real survival hyper game right now are some of the military intelligence agencies. The problem with that is that military intelligence agencies are not us. Like it's not they are not the same player as just the general population or general humanity on planet Earth. What I mean by that is that like they don't necessarily share our same goals, and they may feel like they want to play a game against us. Even if like it partially play for us, they're with us. They also are just a different player who may or may not be cooperative. So you have this situation in which who knows what they're doing, and there's nobody to check them. Like they sort of are, the intelligence world is its own world, really its own player on planet Earth. And you really don't have anything to check it, like, because you could have something to check it. Like you could have academia, the scientists, the smart people, who could be doing something. Like they could have their own sort of I would, like, when I was writing the document, I sort of thought of like maybe there should be something like academic intelligence agencies. They are like the goal is really not to be covert at all. They're just like really only focused on like public counterintelligence. Is because like those would be the people with the capacity to do something. And then that's just humans. And of course, lately with all the hearings and stuff, like they are very serious and honest appearing and legitimate looking intelligence people or military people who claim that there are some like other intelligences around doing stuff. And then you for sure have a hyper game going on, because we don't know who they are, we don't know how many, we don't know their intentions, we don't know like what they would be doing at all, and we certainly don't know what the military intelligence people were or were not doing in regards to them, and like what game they were playing with them. So you have this like very complex situation, which definitely is a hyper game. It's just a question of how complex of a hyper game it really is. And the official mainstream public civilization, that like the representatives, like mainstream politicians or academicians, are not really playing the game. They're just being a piece moved in this game. currently.
There, yes. So, okay, so let's break it down, attempt to simplify it, even though it's extremely hard to simplify. So if we just say the hyper game is life, and we're all trying to be pieces in this game of life. And at the end of the day, our goal, our shared goal is to survive. And let's say thrive. I like the word thrive.
Yep.
Thrivability is this great concept. Michelle Holiday is the person I've been reading this week that talks about the art of thrivability. And she's got some TED Talks and books out there about it. So go check it out, Michelle Holiday, The Art of Thrivability, if you're interested. But very simply speaking, our joint goal is to survive and thrive as a human species. And, so that entails avoiding Armageddon. That entails avoiding, massive wars or massive climate change, natural disasters. These are all joint goals that I believe pretty strongly that any reasonable human being should have. You have a few tyrants out there that are just in it for themselves, that maybe don't care as much if they destroy the world in the process. That's sad. Hopefully we can kind of limit those as much as possible. But if we just say on average, the majority of society's game, the hyper game of life, is to survive and thrive. How do we do that? And how do we kind of, I guess, encourage the maximum number of people to play that game well? And to succeed at progressing humanity towards thriving, surviving and thriving. So
Yeah, I would first do a little bit of a disambiguation of terms. You keep saying game of life or hyper game of life. I would want to make it clear that it's different. What we're talking about is not the game of life that most people know, which is a mathematical construct where you have very simple rules, where you have just a matrix of cells and like a square matrix. And in each cell is either alive or dead. And based on how many living cells surround it, it either survives or dies. And so you put an initial number of cells into the matrix and you press play, and then it just goes iteratively turn by turn, and you see it can create various complex, like basically infinitely complex, maybe even like infinite time spanning, so interminable actually procedures, so it may not even be resolved. So that's a very complex, very interesting, very cool thing. But what we talk about, I believe, is more so like a subjective experience, quality of life, survival type of like life. So
yes.
living maybe would be a better term here. So it's like a game of living, where
I just want to contrast too, of course, the child's game of life, which I think many people are familiar with, where the goal, you just go around on boards and your goal is to kind of get married, have a house,
so board
white
game.
picket fence, the board game of
Right.
life. And I think that's just to understand the context of what we're talking about. That game's really about maximizing your money, your biggest house you can, maybe the most kids, if that's your goal. You want to have a wife, you want to have the best job. The doctor is the best job, 120,000 a year.
So it's capitalist indoctrination.
Yes, and it's similar to Monopoly in that respect, but it's even more for kids. It's like more
Except
basic.
Monopoly was invented to explain to people that capitalism is horrible.
Right, and they
they didn't get the message.
Kind of, yeah, they didn't. They the powers that be co-opted it and made it into a fun teach capitalism is good kind of fun. Capitalism is fun kind of game, and there's always one winner and a bunch of losers. And
that was the point, like how the game was supposed to communicate that capitalism is bad, that you start basically hating everybody else in your family and everybody else is broke and only one person wins.
Yeah, it was definitely lost on many people, but I I still appreciate the fun of competitive games like Monopoly or the game of life. But it's definitely a goal of mine, or a goal to try to educate my children and my friends as to what we can learn beyond these games, what these games can teach us about the actual game of life, which is living and thriving. And let's just call it finding happiness, finding joy, minimizing unnecessary suffering, trying not to hurt each other or take advantage of each other if we can avoid it, be honest, and have all these beautiful, good qualities of empathy and curiosity and love and all those things. So maximizing, let's just say, good things. We've tried to define good and evil in the past with, some success, I think, where good is basically more happiness, more love, more shared joy in a variety of ways, and more freedom, and more safety, all these balances. Whereas evil is anything that takes away from those things, anything that takes away from people's freedom and safety, and in some ways they're contradictory. More freedom equals less safety sometimes, but we're just trying to maximize the amount of freedom, safety, joy, happiness, love, and all the good qualities that we want.
Yeah, of course, that's a I would say very agreeable conception. It's just the issue is like how do you do it? Is more of an issue here than this
Yes.
would be nice if we somehow were able to manage to do these sorts of things.
Well, I think the better we're able to understand that joint goal of what it is we actually want out of life. What does thriving mean? What are the
Yeah. So,
pillars of
so I guess
utopia?
there's just a couple of things I should probably start responding before I forget them all.
But
So I guess we could get a little bit into the sort of from epic rap battles of history. Like for those of you who've seen the one with philosophers, what is winning? As they said at the end instead of who won. That's one of the big question is what is winning, and I think one of the problems of game theory is that it's usually developed by people whose conception of winning is, I think it really does strongly edge toward competitive and edge toward zero sum in the explanation, because like it's usually like who would care about this? Like who would care about figuring out how to win the most? Well, probably some sociopathic person who really wants to win the most for themselves. Like I don't think psychologically we get equally strong motivation from people who want to win cooperatively to who would like most normal people who would just like want to have fun playing, who would be like focusing on how to win the hardest. But if you want to accomplish results, like there is definitely value to figuring out like, okay, so what does lead to winning and what does not. And when you say we need to better understand like this, like what winning basically means in life, then it is a hyper game in that you're really not sure what the winning conditions are, and you can never really be fully sure what winning conditions are. You sort of have to guess what for you makes sense as winning conditions as part of it. But also you don't necessarily know like who's playing with you and who's playing against you. That's also not a given. So you don't also know like who many people are actually like playing to win, because like there are many people who we could call in gaming parlance NPCs. Like that's sort of like one sort of thing I like about computer games, which is sort of a player character versus non-player character is a useful thing in life. I think you can sort of, I think, detect that some people see themselves more as player characters and trying to be a player characters, and many people who really are more of non-player characters who just want to exist and really don't have much control over whatever is happening to them or in their life and don't really seek it. So there's like these uncertainties, and you also don't necessarily know which actions lead to which outcomes. Like that's the thing. Like I would like at this point, I think it's very important to say it like what is the conclusion of sort of the existing hypergame theory of how you should play if you want to like actually accomplish something, because that's applicable both to the defeating hypothetical space aliens, and it applies equally to trying to live your life the best, whatever that means. And so if you're playing a hyper game, like there's some number of strategies that you can adopt to try to improve your chances. And what definitely doesn't help you is not being aware that it's a hyper game. Like there's in the I will reference in under the video, I will reference a paper that I'm sourcing most of this information from by Kovac et al. And in that paper, all of this is explained more technically than I'm talking about it now, and with some mathematics. But basically, I sort of forgot a little bit where I was going with this. This is a bit of a complex thing. So if you want to
understanding that you're in a hyper game.
Yeah, right. So there are two tiers of like sort of in the models of hyper games. There are basically two levels of a hyper game. One level of the hyper game is when only one player knows that a hyper game is being played, that they're playing a hyper game, and the opponent or opponents are just playing a game. So they are not aware of the meta of the hyper dimension. So it's like a person who, like, if you're a normal just person living your life, then you can believe that some game really matters and that some game is life and that that's all there is to it. Usually it happens to people with the economic game. Like they believe it's just like how much money you make. It's just about the career and status or something. And then usually like on the deathbed, they sort of realize it's like, oh, I've wasted my life because that was just a game. And life was so much more than that. So I think this is directly applicable to like you should try to become aware as quickly as possible in your life that life is more than any single game that you can play in life. So it's not just about one thing. The important implications or consequences of this realization are that like, okay, so you were broke, you sort of failed at the career thing. it doesn't mean that all is lost. Like basically it means like whatever specific game you've lost at, it doesn't mean that all is lost. Like it never can mean that all is lost, because it's not all. Like the one game is never all. So I think that's one sort of important realization. Other realization is that if you become aware that that the whole thing is a hyper game, you also get a little bit of a ability to, I guess it depends from person to person, or with experience or levels of understanding that you achieve, but it could have different results. But basically you get some level of distance from yourself, because you sort of have to start thinking of yourself in a third person a little bit.
Yeah.
You're sort of being an observer of even who you are. So like adding like sort of like one meta level to your existence.
It's a little bit like, learning from your failures and getting back on the horse too, right? If you see life as a hyper game, you understand that every game you lose is just kind of knowledge that you can take with you to the next part of the hyper game to actually do better in the future. So you can kind of, I think probably one of the most important parts of hyper gaming is to keep the right mindset, and to not get too frustrated or depressed or suicidal, and want to end the game because it's not going well for you at any given point. Particularly school shootings is one of the most tragic things, I think, in our world today, where people are so depressed that they want to end their own personal hyper game and many other people's game as well, because they're so frustrated with the rules of the game. So we can
probably
somehow...
one very specific thing about it. Like it's probably either somebody thought that them being romantically rejected is all there is to life, or they thought that some financial thing is all there is to life, or that some racist ideology is all there is to life. Like you have to get into a pretty extreme viewpoint, because one of the things that the awareness of being in a hypergame creates is some level of reasonable doubt. Like you are starting to question things then, like you because you're never sure if what you're doing is actually optimal in a hyper game, because it's a changing, shifting thing where there are factors that you don't know. So it's more of like the Socratic I know that I know nothing kind of real wisdom. So like sort of the like you reaching the real wisdom by going from I thought I had it figured all, I thought I had everything figured out, to I know that I know nothing, and that's the advancement. And it's very hard to be in the Socratic mode of thinking and being an extremist. That's very difficult to accomplish.
You just made me think of a bit of a trichotomy, a triangle here that I want to kind of throw it out there because it just kind of dawned on me. So you've got the triangle of winning conditions, and let's just call them patterns of life, where you have one point is politics. Whether you're right or left or capitalist or liberals, that's kind of one point of the triangle. Another point might be, spiritual / religious, versus, what do you believe? What is the purpose of life from your spiritual religious perspective? And I think the third kind of important point that I didn't really see as a separate thing, but it probably is, and this is your social or romantic constructs, where your goal is to connect with others. Right. And of course you connect with others politically and religiously, but even more so, this is your family. This is your individual specific circumstances. So all three of these things are constantly at odds with each other and kind of gaming each other, right?
I think I should quickly interject. If you want to solve this with geometry, then I highly recommend the Zodiac and the astrological model, where you can have 12 of these, and you have like explained which of these are in synergy and which of these are in conflict with each other. Even though your reduction to 3 was, I think, pretty solid. It's just you can pick any number and then just have to make an equilateral, like pick the number of equally important things in the same category, and then you can do 3, 4, 6, 12, like whatever number you want. But the divisions, like just the more divisions you make, the smaller the differences between the things that you've selected are going to be. But anyway, I think this sort of geometric approach is actually valid in modeling a hypergame a little bit, because it sort of gives you a map of possibilities and map of their possible interactions. So just to continue in the explanation of how winning works, or what to do as opposed to what not to do. So first you need to become aware that you are playing a hypergame, and then the hypergame evolves into a level 2 hypergame, where it's multiple different players playing against each other who all realize it's a hypergame. It's just like the more people involved who know that it is a hyper game, the more hyper it gets, because it's more sort of recursive. Like it's more self-referential, and that like there's more feedback loops in that than there, because like the strategies, if you like the people who studied it, like they sort of noticed a couple of strategies that seem to lead to winning the most or more than other strategies, and it has conditions, and I don't think it's perfectly mapped out or like extremely like 100% solid scientific theory. I think it's going to evolve. But basically, one thing you may try to do is called opponent modeling. This means that you're trying to, in human terms, in simple human terms, you're trying to figure out what the other people believe. That like you think may be players or can potentially be players in the game. So you're trying to understand others and then act in accordance with your best understanding of what they believe they're doing. So that's a sort of a responsive strategy to the other players around you, because like you could try to do something that's more like mathematically ideal, but this could work better if you're very good at modeling other people in the game. But that's the thing, like if you, there's a term called outguessing, meaning that like what you need to do is basically to outguess or outthink other people if you're trying to model them in order for you to be more successful than them. If you believe that they're smart enough, and this would be in a competitive game, if you think they're smart enough or smart like you or smarter than you potentially, and you believe you may not be able to outguess them, then what you may try to do instead is a different strategy, is either picking one subgame, so basically trying to identify which of the more understood self-contained subgames, like for instance money thing or politics thing or religion thing. So pick one of those that you believe that combination of you are most able to actually be good in or good at, and but at the same time actually matters a lot in the outcome. Because again, winning is achieving optimal outcomes. It's the most general way of defining winning. So which does apply to cooperative goals as well. It's just whatever you feel is most optimal outcome. So you pick one game that you can be good at and that will make a lot of difference, or you believe will make the most difference, which can be changing in time and maybe depending on various variables. Or you can create a weighted combination of different subgames. So you basically try to do a couple of different things at once. But again, what you're trying to always model or find out when making these decisions is like, which of the other players is more important or impactful than the others, and which of the subgames is more impactful or more important than the others. Okay. So that's sort of a technical way of explaining how best strategy works in a hypergame generally.
Okay, let me throw out a real world example, because this is something I struggle with sometimes. So say I do have a board game group. We play, say, once a week or once every couple of weeks, and we all have kind of very different strategies that we employ. We play very kind of complicated, a variety of games like D&D, but there's usually competitive, sometimes cooperative in nature. And we all kind of have different styles, right? There's, the spike among us where it's winning at all odds. He'll do anything to cut throat everybody else at just the right time and pretend he's losing. I kind of have this trait sometimes, but we all have our kind of genre that we play. And it's fun to think about which role we want to play in whatever game, and whether we're a lawful good character or chaotic evil character, as we've talked about, alignment. But part of the fun of playing any game is trying to take yourself out of your normal life circumstance and throw yourself in some kind of fantasy environment where you get to play different roles, and you get to kind of, I guess, push the envelope as to what you can do. And in some ways, even cheat can be kind of a fun thing, even though some people will frown on it and kill you and never want to play with you again if you ever caught cheating. But in some ways, cheating is a fun part of the game. If say one guy's way ahead and the game's basically over, unless somebody kind of cheats to make it a little more even and a little more fun, then in some cases like that, cheating could be a fun, good thing. And it's, so I'm just trying to set the stage here for trying to figure out. So among a group of friends that are trying to have fun playing a game once a week, that's their hyper game, and the types of games they play are all, you're not just playing that one game, you're playing for future weeks, and you're playing to set the stage to maximize the fun for everybody, right? Not just the one person who wins the game that week, but to try to just make all games you play as a group more fun. So so that's the stage being set, and what I see as my role is trying to continuously keep things interesting and different and changing, whereas other people's roles might be, by the book. Let's play it by the rules all the time. That's what I enjoy is fun.
So you're basically playing a game master hyper game.
Yes, kind of. Kind of. So I guess the question I have for you is where different people have all these different concepts and different styles of what they like. Trying to understand that is part of the fun. Trying to understand what game everybody else is playing is part of the fun of living the hyper game of life. And that's something that I really enjoy doing. Now, if other people don't enjoy that and they kind of get offended when I do that, or turns into arguments, which it often does in our game group, we argue quite a bit more than most game groups, I think. And I'm just in very ways a debatable kind of argumentative type person that sometimes goes over the top. Sometimes I get a little too heated or too passionate, a little bipolar ups and downs there sometimes. But I think it's that roller coaster of life that keeps it kind of interesting. And if you're always kind of just going along the same straight track with the same rules, it can be a little boring. And it gets boring fast. So I'm constantly trying to mix it up and keep things interesting, keep things different. So that's kind of my personal goal. Now, when that goal kind of conflicts with other people's goals in the group, it can lead to either a breakdown of the group eventually. You could play for years together and finally realize, oh, I don't like playing games with this guy anymore. He's too unpredictable, he's too wild, too up and down. So I guess I'm just trying to kind of simplify the concept of hypergame theory for everybody. What do you think of that concept? Should one person try to change his style of gaming to make it more fun for others, or should he try to find a new game group, or should he, mix and mingle, or what do you think? Just
Well,
based on that example.
that's possibly a way deeper philosophical question than you might have been aware when asking it than the whole question of hypergaming even is, because this is a question of like, okay, so in a hypergame, even in a hypergame, in the hypergame theory concept, you yourself is something that's conceptualized as, well, you know what you want. You do set what the optimal outcome is for you. So it's not answering how you should set what the optimal outcome is for you. That would be a hyper game thing. It's like, that's from somewhere else. Like that's not a game, or at least not necessarily game in the same sense of game theory games, or how game theory sees games, because yeah, that's a question of your identity, and you have to figure out who you are and what you want. Like, I actually really like it it's very fundamental questions, very powerful, from Babylon 5. Have you seen Babylon 5?
Yeah,
So
not the whole thing, parts of it,
yeah, so the who are you and what do you want questions. And I think that's that those two super advanced races from that show who asked each one of these questions had it really figured out. Like, I think that's really cutting to the core what's actually important. So it's like, because it's like, okay, so you want to win a game to achieve an outcome. So basically that's the shadow question. What do you want? Like, you have to decide what game you're playing. In a hyper game especially, because like if you're playing chess, it's like, okay, I decided to play chess, therefore I accepted all the rules and regulations of playing chess, and there's no question about anything anymore. So I think that's a part of the appeal of games as like normal games, is that it really makes life feel more manageable for a while. Because it's like, I don't have to think about all of these actually important questions as long as I'm playing, I don't know, poker or chess or Go. It's just, I know the rules, I know who I am, I know what I'm trying to do. It's extremely simplified. So I think sort of playing at knowing what you want to do in life a little bit, if I just try to describe it philosophically. So I'm not sure hypergame theory or game theory can help you figure out what it is that you actually want to accomplish. It can, once you figure out what it is that you want to accomplish, then you can use game theory or hypergame theory to even mathematically figure out how to best achieve it.
Okay. All right. So in summary, to summarize an hour, long discussion on a very complicated topic, well, how would you summarize it? What can we take away from this to kind of improve our lives and improve, the world in some way? How would you try to simplify it at the end of the day?
Well, I believe that as many people as possible should try to become aware that real life is much more of a hyper game than just a game. Like, as we discussed it, whether on personal level, it means like to take a step back and realize that you don't know everything, that there's more to life than you believe. I think that's very useful. And with that realization, you can actually try to strategize more effectively and actually increase chances of whatever optimal outcomes actually are for you, or even discovering what optimal outcomes actually are for you by just playing life better a little bit. It also makes you more aware of what other people believe and want, because that's the part of the winning strategy, is modeling what they believe and want. You need to know it. Like if you don't know it, then you can't play it nearly as effectively. So even if you start with sort of selfish motivation, you still will be sort of pushed by this realization and by playing a hyper game into becoming more aware person, more considerate person, I think, because you realize that that's how you, whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish, that's the best way of trying to do that. On the side of saving the world, I think it is about time for the academia to get smarter or start using more of its own theories, because like game theory and hypergame theory are academic disciplines. I just find it quite sad that in real life it's just secret organizations who are using it, really, and or marketers or business people who are trying to steal money from other people, or just basically mean people or secretive people, and the sort of well-intentioned people are not even playing in most cases. And I think the state of our world is a result in large part of like the good people not actually playing to win most games, let alone the overall hyper game of basically determining what the future is going to be like in an uncertain situation where there are some threats we know, there are some players that are obvious, but there are also probably some players that are hidden and some threats that are hidden. And if we just get a little bit smarter about it, then we demonstrably will increase chances of our survival and chances of us thriving, or the amount to which we can achieve thriving, I believe. So I think this is, it's also more explored what all of the potential hypothetical hyper-ish problems are explained in the document that I'm almost finished writing now for SGEARS. So I do recommend everyone who's interested in this sort of stuff and like saving the world in particular to check out that document. But like I said, even in terms of personal philosophy, I just believe that, because that's the thing, I didn't know that hypergame theory is a thing, but I always suspected, I sort of figured out on my own that that is the approach that you should take. Like, realize that I don't know a lot, like I said, with the Socratic thing. Like, Socrates, I think, was the first guy to started thinking in that way. It's just like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we really don't know about, and I should better adapt what I'm doing to the fact that we don't know. I would say, I don't want to say the vulgarism because of YouTube, but don't know stuff. So it's just, I think, very useful. And I was just glad that because of writing this document, I actually found that it is a scientific theory that I can therefore now study more in detail. And there have been some experiments and research done on this, even though even the authors that I will link to under this video who summarize it say that there's a lot of open questions and a lot of stuff hasn't been figured out. For instance, there was no research really into how hypergame evolves over time, or how you should play with the factoring in that things may change in time, which is kind of important. So yeah, much more work to do in this area.
So let's just say, first of all, knowledge is power. The more we learn about hyper games and the type of games we're playing in life, and the more as a society we're able to share that knowledge and kind of agree that we're playing, the same type of game with the same type of goals, where we can maybe have more win-win scenarios. That's one. And then two, I think educating particularly the 1% of the most powerful, well-off people in the world, that kind of the world is worth saving, and that they can win their own personal game more if they kind of work together with the rest of us to save the world and thrive.
Yeah, that's actually, I should give an example here, because that's sometimes being used as an example. Like the kings, like the absolute monarchs, the rulers of the past, were comparatively more impoverished than average living people today, because since sort of the whole monarchy thing died, and definitely absolutism, in the large part, of course, there's still places in Earth that are authoritarian, totalitarian, and what have you. But since there was a modern society and all the things related with it, then everybody's wealth, or average wealth, or access to stuff, access to services, increased so much so because of the much more cooperative playing than before, that even those people who try to maximize their own well-being are now much better off because of it than they could have been in just like absolute monarchy world. So even the people
Right.
who are right now just trying to make most money are maybe playing a dumb game instead of realizing they should be playing a hyper game to increase everybody's wealth so much so that in the end it will be calculably better for them as well.
Right. And I think that's the third point, is switching the game from me winning, from me to we, to us all thriving and humanity as a whole, better able to survive the coming apocalypses.
Because let me put it in game theory terms. It's more rational to try to be the richest person in a richer society than the richest person in a poorer society.
Right. That makes perfect sense. And I think the better we're able to understand this and share it with our friends and family, particularly those maybe in higher tiers of society that have more power to change the game for all of us, that we can all survive and thrive better together, playing this game in a more skillful way as a society.
Also, there's one more thing I would like to recommend, and that's you can involve a lot more of this in gaming. Now, like specifically computer gaming, like in part, if you want to educate people about it, could be a way to do it a little bit. Because if you made a popular game that's based on it, then that would probably popularize it, the whole idea. And so you could definitely make, because I was thinking about it actually. There's even one related term called trans gaming, meaning that you have games within games within games. That's already getting close to what actually hyper games are. But you could specifically have a hyper game in that most games so far, if not all of them, are sort of boring and predictable on some level because they're just games because you really know what you're doing the whole time. There are no surprises in terms of no changes in rules over time. Like for instance, in fantasy RPGs, like the fantasy's name of the genre, it should be like imaginative. Do you know who I'm aware of? Who was the last person who was actually playing with this hyper game concept in fantasy?
No.
I think, what's his name? Lord British. Do you know Ultima Games?
No, I'm not familiar.
I think it's Richard Garriott. I don't want to get it wrong. So the person who made Ultima Games was sort of already like Ultima Games, very old fantasy games, one of the first fantasy computer games that are fantasy RPGs as we know them today. And after doing like 2 or 3 of them, he was already bored with the normal concept so much that he started sort of playing with ideas like, so you're used to like you get a quest, you should do it. And so you get the quest and you do it and it ends in horrible consequences. Because it's like, why should you just assume that you should just do what some random person told you? So like you can introduce these sort of uncertainties about what it is that we're even playing. And in some genres, like in fantasy RPGs specifically, could be incredibly interesting.
On that note, I wanted to recommend one game that my brother recommended to me a week and a half ago. It's called Be Carbonize, B-E-E, the letter B, and Carbonize. And it's just a very simple game. You can finish it in 2 to 3 hours. It's free on Steam. Go check it out, Be Carbonize, where you're basically just playing cards. And the cards are your production, your industry, your environmental cards that help your environment and produce food and value, and then your people cards, which produce people and synergies, and then your science cards. So you have 4 categories, and basically you evolve through our current state of the world to a future state, and you're trying to kind of save the world from climate change and destruction of various kinds. And there's various kind of events, tipping points that kind of come as your industry produces more carbon. As the carbon gets higher, your tipping points and negative events happen, and you have to kind of deal with them with the resources you get, your people and your industry and your science resources, your energy. So it's a very interesting game and there's 6 different ways to win it, where you just kind of build through, and you have this ultimate gold card, which is like some kind of version of protopia or utopian future, the kind of how you build towards it. And it was just a really neat math game that kind of got my mind thinking in different ways on how we really want to thrive as a society. So I highly recommend that style of game for anybody. Probably with just an indie developer. Yeah.
Sounds very cool. Like if I were to recommend one game relevant to what we were talking about today, I would recommend Terra Invicta, where you're trying to defend the Earth from an oncoming alien invasion, and you can pick as like what kind of faction with what kind of goal you want to approach it. There are some like straightforward ones like for the aliens, like humanity first against, like, basically kill all the aliens, be servants to aliens, and then it sort of gets resist the aliens without necessarily killing all of them, be a protectorate of the aliens but still somewhat autonomous. And then you have more interesting options in the middle where you have academy, which is basically we are trying to get as smart and technologically advanced as them so that they see us as their equals. And the other two, more creative one, Exodus, which is we need to pack up and leave, like build basically a spaceship that will get us to a different solar system and just go bye-bye. And the most intricate one, which is most hypergame-like, the Initiative, which is basically a bunch of sociopath CEOs who just are waiting and see how to make the most profit of the whole situation.
There you go.
So that's, I think, if you want to like practice some of these sort of ideas and concepts in a game form, then I think, and particularly in relation to what we write about in the SGEARS document, about how to protect the world, then I think that's currently the most interesting game. Although, fair warning, it's like one game is like a week. Like if you wanted to, you can actually play it in real time, like a minute by minute, like an actual slower than light traveling through space. You could play the game, like one game, for 40 years if you wanted to.
Wow. There you go. So you have a very extreme, complicated, longer game, and you have a very basic, simple kind of card game. Both interesting ways to change your mind on how games work and what kind of society we want to build. So there you have it, Hypergame in a nutshell. And thanks so much for sharing with us today, Martin, your ideas on hypergaming. Thanks so much for joining us. If you've lasted this long through the video, we're so grateful. Please comment and let us know what you want to see in the future. And if you're one of my friends watching this, please let me know on how I can make our gaming group better for the few people, and share comments on how you can make life better and make games better for everyone so that we can enjoy thriving and surviving and enjoy all the wonderful love and great games that this world has to offer. It's been a great part of my life. I've been a gamer since I was 4 years old, playing, and even before probably. It's always been a huge part of my life, and I'm very, very happy about that and excited about the games of the future and how we can continue to build upon what we know, and continue to thrive going forward. So thanks so much again, and let's save the world together.